Hello and a very warm welcome back to my YouTube channel. Now, according to Statistics Sweden, house prices adjusted for inflation fell by over 13% in 2022. In the main cities, the decline was even worse. When adjusted for inflation, house prices in Stockholm fell by nearly 15%. In Gothenburg, they fell by around 14.5%, and in Malmö, just over 15%. So is it a good time to buy? Many would say yes, in particular given the fact that Sweden has a very low total government debt to GDP ratio, which stands at around 32%. And this is much lower than most Western European countries, and of course, much lower than the US and Japan. And the trend is also generally downwards. In 2014, the figure actually stood at 45%. Also, demographically, the statistics are not too bad either. Despite the falling birth rate at just over 1.5 per woman, it's still higher than many other countries in Western Europe, such as Italy, Spain, and Portugal. And coupled with the fact that Sweden has a very high immigration rate, in actual fact, the highest immigration per million in Europe, this will ensure that the population of Sweden will continue to rise steadily in the future. And of course, an increasing population is always good for the future prospects of the housing market. Now, we should also point out that Sweden has an excellent transport system, has an amazing standard of living, and a top-notch healthcare system. All amazing factors for this country. However, I'm going to give you 10 reasons why you should not invest in the Swedish real estate market. The first one is this: house prices are still very expensive. In the last 20 years, house prices in Sweden have almost quadrupled, and more importantly, far outstripped wage growth. So, in actual fact, for the average Swede, house prices are still very expensive, and so I'm expecting more drops in the future. Number two, floating rate mortgages. In Sweden, most households have floating rate mortgages, which means they are far more sensitive to interest rate rises than in countries like the UK and Germany, where the vast majority of borrowers are on fixed mortgages. And just think, prices in the UK are starting to come down, and I think this is going to be mirrored, but not just mirrored in Sweden. I think it's going to be worse in Sweden than in a country like the UK, simply because of the number of floating rate mortgages. Number three, high inflation and further interest rate rises. Now, like many countries, Sweden has suffered high inflation, and even though it appears to have peaked and it's actually dropping, it's still above 10%, and I'm expecting more interest rate rises this year, which is further going to put Swedish borrowers in more trouble and more pain, and hence more price drops. Number four, high personal debt levels. Now, the government in Sweden may have low debt levels, but individuals certainly do not. Sweden's household debt as a percentage of disposable income is one of the highest in Europe at over 200%. This is another bad sign for the housing market. Number five, relative high unemployment. Sweden's unemployment rate is over 8%, which is quite high, but more worryingly, youth unemployment is well above 20%, which is obviously a bad sign for the future of Sweden and the housing market. Number six, a recession is looming in Sweden. Of all the EU countries, Sweden is the only one where the economy is expected to be in recession in the year 2023. In fact, it's the only country in the 27 nation bloc which will see negative annual growth. And most experts are predicting a drop of 1.5% to 2% in GDP growth for the year 2023. And this is going to be even worse than Brexit Britain. And we all know how badly Brexit is affecting Britain. Number 7, unspectacular rental yields. Now, rental yields in Sweden, although not too bad, are not spectacular either. So, depending on location and type of property, you are looking on average at around 4 to 5%, which is okay, but nothing really excellent for investors to think about. Number 8, a very pro-tenant market. Now, Sweden is certainly not landlord friendly at all. Tenants have good protection in here, and in fact, Sweden has rent controls, so this is definitely not a buy-to-let market for foreign investors. Number 9, relatively high taxation. Now, Sweden generally is a high taxation country, although to be fair, there is no inheritance tax here, or there's no wealth tax either. Capital gains tax on selling a property is 22% and rental income tax is 30%, although there are some very, very good deductions here. And finally, number 10, I just want to mention another couple of things: currency risk and political risk. Now, although Sweden is in the EU, it is not in the euro. So one must factor in that there is more currency risk compared to many other EU countries. And in the last 10 years, both the euro and the USD have gone up a lot against the Swedish krona. 10 years ago, 1 euro got you around 8.5 Swedish krona. It now gets you around 11.3 kronas. So that is a hell of a difference. And with Sweden expecting a difficult future, especially in the next year or so, possibly the Swedish krona might go down even further against the euro and the USD. Although you just never know with currencies, and it potentially could be an upside as well. But for those of you who want to avoid currency risk or at least reduce currency risk, Sweden may not be the place for you. And within this last number 10 category, obviously I want to put political risk. Now, although for me, I don't think it's too much of a political risk, we have to mention Sweden is not in NATO. And this may put off some buyers from investing in the real estate market here. Although I would like to add that Sweden does not have a border with Russia. Although I think a lot of people now, when they're looking at property markets, in particular what's happened in the Ukraine, may want to invest in countries which are in NATO, in particular if you're coming from the West. Not so much, obviously, if you're coming from the East, but certainly a lot of people from Western Europe and the US, potentially now when they're looking at real estate markets, they are looking at whether countries are in NATO or not. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you think investing in the Swedish real estate market could be profitable? Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks ever so much for watching, and I shall see you soon on the next video.